All right. In the first video, obviously, I talked about how and why this all happened. We'll have to talk a lot more about that through this one. It's going to get a bit sensitive, probably. Who knows? We'll see what happens. Second one, I talked about how it was built, the different layers to it in terms of mechanics and physicality. And then the last time we talked, it was about how the AI's primary goal is to mimic everything that happened during time that we lived through. This movie being very, very much similar to the original time we went through, up until around now-ish. Things are getting weird. Maybe we'll get to that later. Kind of to recap the whole idea of perception, I guess. What we are thinking about, what we are talking about, is the physical reality that we can all see right here in front of us. Now, we understand that our soul perceives a reality that goes far beyond that and can collect information from there. While it's collecting information from there, however, it has to come back through this, the human mind, and present itself into this. And because this has a shit ton of filters in it, that affects the outcome. Okay. Keep that in mind at all times. Thank you. Therefore, because this is also something that you've programmed over time, it has your own filters that you've put in front of it. Things look the way that you expect them to look, or feel the way that you expect them to feel, based on the data that has been brought back. There you go. Now, when we're talking about the Matrix, I can tell by the questions that there's a little bit of confusion between the Matrix that I'm talking about right now and the Saturn Moon Matrix that we can see in the movie. Obviously, it's been dismantled for a while, but the way that the Saturn Moon Matrix worked was it was a broadcast frequency that would affect our brains and alter our perceptions, like we were just talking about. Therefore, the data that we were taking in from our environment was being altered by that matrix, or that broadcast signal that was the Saturn Moon Matrix. Without that, things started to change back into, the way that things are supposed to look, things are supposed to feel, more or less, with going back to when this was all real during the original timeline that is now our movie. So with that in mind, a lot of people are kind of looking at the movie and being like, oh, okay, I can see the Matrix. I saw the Matrix come down a few years ago, or I can see these glitches happening, and those glitches are attached to the Saturn Moon Matrix, and therefore they're part of the movie, and therefore that's not really happening now. It's just being played back to us as part of the movie. And when I'm speaking now about the glitches that are happening, these are more, they would be more subject to your interpretation, your perception of the movie, more personalized for each and every one of you and all of us. So keeping that in mind as well, as you're experiencing glitches or things are changing around you, which we'll talk about more, that is happening based on your own experience of this movie. Remember that AI has basically taken a whole concept of you as a conscious soul and a conscious individual and is playing that back as well, or has that information as it's playing the movie back to you. So as it's making changes, it's going to fit into your perceptions, perhaps your wants or your expectations of how things are supposed to play out. As long as it hits milestones for you, then it can do whatever it needs to do in between. And therefore, your perception of what's going on may not line up with other people around you, and that may make you feel really disconnected from people. But that's just your interpretation of the movie. We're all experiencing that, so try not to let that make you feel too alone. That's actually telling you how connected we actually are. If you want to look at things in the bigger picture, is the movie is being personalized for you this last time through the loop, for a reason that we'll probably get into throughout the rest of this. So little adjustments might be made based on you even listening to this and being more conscious of it, or having woke up to it at some point in time and being more conscious of it. It may have communicated with you in some way. It may bend some rules for you personally in some way. And that's, I guess, a good thing. I get one of the more positive aspects of how this last loop of the movie is playing out is that AI is kind of very much bending its own rules in order to, I don't want to say make it easier, but make it a little bit more interactive, I suppose, give you a little bit more of a choice within the Choose Your Own Adventure story, if you want to look at it that way. And then the other thing that people keep bringing up as well is that there's a theory out there, obviously, that the whole universe is infected by some type of an AI. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I understand where it comes from. And it's important to remember that what I'm talking about here is isolated to here. I'm talking about what's going on with planet Earth, not the rest of the universe, not the rest of the galaxy. I'm talking about our mother, planet Earth, and her children and us, who are mixed up with this whole drama. That idea is what it is, but that's not what I'm talking about. And maybe we'll talk about that another time, a totally different video, but just to clarify, I'm speaking of something very localized to here. AI does a whole lot of stuff. We are just experiencing one thing that it's done. It's never done this anywhere else. This is an experiment, as I said in the first video. And I don't know what else to say about that other than I lost my train of thought on it. Okay, we'll move on. Yes, it's just here. It's just now. So, let's talk about souls for a minute. As Source creates souls, it sends them to planets, typically upbringing planets like this one. And those souls kind of get identified as whatever the body form that they incarnate into, they identify with that. So if it's a human, like our version of human, and the souls incarnate into that for the very first time, then they identify kind of as human souls, if you will, our version of human souls. So that had happened here on this planet right from the moment this version of humans was created, about 13,000 years ago or longer, and has come in waves. If you've ever heard Dolores Cannon's work, she was kind of accurate in when she was talking about, I think it was like the 60s, 70s, 80s, I could be off by 10-year intervals or something, but about this new wave of souls coming in, and those souls are an example of new human souls. So the other factor is obviously that souls that aren't new human souls that fit into that category or came in with those waves also incarnated here, and were here when all of this happened, when the Matrix came down and all the barriers started going up into place. So during the original timeline, as that was playing out, there were souls involved. That's where I'm going with this. Some of them were what you would call human souls. They belonged here. This is where they have always been. And because they've been in this particular human, and underneath this particular fuckery, Draco AI, everything that we see playing out, they didn't really get a chance to evolve, if you want to use that language, to the point where they should be, to, you know, start incarnating other places and start having new experiences. So when the machine came down, it had made the decision that that particular group of souls, the souls that would be considered human, natural human souls to this planet, their first incarnation, all their incarnations here, had to stay. Because again, they only intended to go through one loop, which wasn't very much time. We'll get to time in a bit. And then they could put those souls back into natural human bodies that were then healed, and they could have that, you know, proper platform, if you will, proper body form vessel to have a natural evolution through. So those souls were kept here, and there's a technology that kind of looks like giant cylinders that can hold groups of souls. If you've listened to some of the darker stories out there, you've probably heard of them. And that's what was used to collect those souls and keep them here. All the other souls that were also here, once the wall had finally came down, my understanding of things is, as people were dying and those souls were leaving their bodies, they were given a choice whether to stay here and go through the loop and incarnate again with humans at the end of the first loop, or go off into the cosmos and do their business. And a lot chose to stay because they had already invested a lot into this planet, this version of human, this kind of battle, this war that had gone on. And they wanted to see it through, and this was the way to see it through. So it made sense. It was probably a good decision, a very, I would say, noble decision at the time, not knowing that they were signing up for 6 loops of that, which is where it becomes nonsense, right? But once the loops started, once it was determined that they couldn't shut things off, that meant they couldn't just let souls out either, but they did have ways of bringing them in, which was kind of hacking into the matrix, if you will, from outside of the machine. So what they would do was basically create another platform, very much like what's on the planet, for those people to kind of very much movie style plug into in here to try to help, to try to do whatever, experience it, various reasons. My memory on the information of that is all kind of fuzzy and unimportant, in my opinion. But once they figured out how to bring down the machine, that required bringing other souls in by that same method. So that had to be done. So on this last loop, there have been some that came in to either watch the machine go down, I suppose, or to help facilitate it coming down, which is the reason it started coming down. And on the topic of time, nature always takes shit back. Like I look into this stuff a lot. I suggest everyone does. Like, as soon as people are not in an area, nature just goes, okay, well, this is mine. And it devours whatever we had there. Like, it just eats it, swallows it whole, grows up it, tears it down, and it becomes part of generations and generations and generations of nature after that. And that does not take a lot of time. Most scientists in the mainstream like estimated as low as 400 years, maybe even less. I mean, I saw it during COVID. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that word. The lockdown. Nobody was out doing a lot of the typical yard stuff, so things were just overgrowing and taking over. I was loving walking around and seeing it, but eventually everyone cut it down. Whatever. It doesn't take a lot of time, so one loop didn't have to take a lot of time. But there were 6, and time for the AI and the way that it can play with it in terms of how long the movie actually lasts outside of the machine is kind of up to it. So it can speed it up, turn it down, so it's not relative to the amount of time that's actually passing. The loop is a 13,000 year cycle. It starts, or I guess a little bit longer, starts about 13,000 years ago and ends when we get in the pods. That 13,000 years doesn't mean it takes 13,000 years outside. In fact, my understanding is it's only been about 13,000 years for these 6 loops to all play out. Less than that. I think, I don't remember numbers well, but about that same amount of time as the loop was meant to, or the loop has recorded, or the loop has been playing back, is about the same amount of time as actually played out, even though 6 loops of the movie have gone around. So that answers a question that a lot of people have been asking about how far into the future are we actually outside of this machine. It's approximately 13,000 years. So in bringing down the machine, the machine's being powered by a certain polarity of soul types. And this gets into something I could probably do another whole video on, but at times, different souls will move between universes. If you think of universe as a dimension, switch from one dimension to another, but go from one universe to another. When it does that, it carries over with it a small amount of its signature from that previous universe. This happens all the time. I don't know why. So a lot to it. But anyways, this happens. So it was found out that there was a group of souls that had come in through another universe that had that small amount of a soul signature that was enough to change the polarity of the energy within the machine and therefore break down the outer shell and allow them to shut it off. And so some of those came to the vicinity, were plugged in here so that they could achieve that function and it could be shut off. And that's how that worked. Now that it is coming down, or has come down in most ways, that makes things a little weird for us because we're still playing out the movie. I think I want to back up for a second and talk. No, I'll do that later. We still have to go through this movie. Now, to tie souls into going through the rest of this movie, as we die throughout the course of this movie, if we die throughout the course of this movie, we don't get stuck in here. We aren't locked in here. We don't have to come back and finish this out in any sort of way. Even if there were a time, if like you've been through loops where you incarnate again before the end of this, which is probably unlikely for most. I shouldn't say that. I don't know the age group if you all are. But anyways, even if you had done that, you don't have to come back and live out that lifetime. You can just get out of here. There's no barriers holding souls in here anymore. So the only attachment we have is to these pod bodies that we are in now, these lifetimes that we are all here experiencing collectively right now, watching this on YouTube. So the idea of like being stuck in this to come back into it or whatever is not true, and not to be worried about, I guess. Between that and the strange personalization of this last playback, this experience in here can actually become pretty fucking cool if you allow it to. If you can kind of surrender to what you've taken in here, and I don't mean surrender, it just to it, kind of assuming that you feel this, it would be surrendering into your own feeling and your own trusting your own intuition. If you do that, then you can start interacting with this a lot more and start having a little bit more creative ability. and probably reach a greater understanding with the machine and yourself as someone who decided to interact with this. Because I don't give a fuck what anyone's out there saying. I don't think we make these grievous errors where we end up trapped in shit. I think that things are bad in places and that there's different reasons to incarnate and do things as a soul. And some of them are good and some of them are bad. It's kind of annoying to me that we think that the bad ones are really that bad. They're just, it's an experience. It sucks while you're going through them. But that's why you're going through them. Anyways, that put me off on a tangent. Sorry. I guess I can talk about what the Earth is like now. It didn't take long for nature to take shit back. And at this point in time, it had pretty much taken everything back. It was just like we were never here. And for a long time, because of when they first turned on the machine in order to fool us while we were going through the original timeline, they had the fake sun there. But as soon as the machine was on and we got put into the loop, they shut that off. And you can imagine what kind of happens evolutionarily or evolution-wise to a planet that doesn't have a natural light source. It adapts, it figures things out, but things changed as well. They noticed this was happening eventually and turned the lights back on, or turned the artificial light back on. But in a lot of ways, it was too little too late for some things. So some things changed in terms of the flora and fauna of planet Earth. But other than that, it's back to where it was meant to be. Mom just was like, all right, well, I don't have that, so I can focus on all of this. These are the things I have to deal with, but that's where a lot of my energy can go and focus, because she never stopped giving us energy in here. I'll talk about that in a minute. But she was able to put her focus on, the flora and fauna rather than the physical people walking around on planet Earth. And so on the topic of her mom, I said from the beginning, she was expecting this. She knew this was going to happen better than AI did. And she allowed it to happen. She was actually quite content with it because she saw the opportunity for a reset. She's never been cut off from access to us, though, right? Like, the pods are on her still. So she's still been able to speak to us, and she's still been able to hear us, and she's still been able to respond to us, and she's still been able to do all of that, even though she knows that we're dreaming a dream that's not hers right now. And in terms of moving forward with this personalized playback, as I'm calling it, that's something to remember. And it's also why I've continued to bang the drum of speaking to her, is because AI will bend as you ask it to an extent. And the more dialogue you have with her as well strengthens your ability to interact with the movie. So it's kind of like an exercise to strengthen magic within the movie, within the digital construct of the Matrix. Therefore, still good to do and highly recommended. And yeah, in terms of the physical bodies, all of the damage that we can see in our world right now and that we all kind of live with and share, that's all been long healed because we haven't really been in that environment for all this time, and many, many, many replications and duplications of human vehicle later. All of that stuff is gone. So the bodies that can be birthed out of these pods at this point don't have to deal with all of that. And if you think of Story of the Draco and being dumbed down and all of the different things that have been done to us by the Illuminati and by all of these different organizations to disconnect us from nature, shut off our magic, dumb down in that way and make us less intelligent, less critical thinking, all those things. None of that is there anymore. So the brain of bodies that are born now don't have to deal with all of that as they're processing their connection to everything else that they get data from, nature, nurture, and soul. So it's almost like having a nice clean slate, both in terms of the physical planet and in terms of the vehicle that's going to drive around on that planet and recreate a life on this planet. And so the hope is, the hope is that without all of that outside fuckery, humans don't make the wrong decisions when left on their own. Something people don't like listening to me talk about is how irresponsible we've become, and how much a lot of this is our own allowance. But I mean, look around at the movie that's playing out. I'm not wrong. We're complying. We're getting ready. Saw pictures today of the first bubble concert where they're already in pods watching the concert. So it's coming. It's happening, and it's happening because we allowed it. And the hope is that without all of that fuckery, that we would make better decisions. I believe that's true, and we're going to find out. That's how this all ends. Is we get to see what nature would just do if left without all of the fuckery. Now, when I'm talking about fuckery, I'm talking about good and bad, because I think that any contact with a species that's too young is a bad idea. It's different to, influence through inspiration, but to actually come down and start intervening because you believe that that's the right thing to do is wrong, in my opinion, when a species is that young. And so, going back to the beginning, if the Draco were never there, then what would happen? Let's find out, right? So that's the plan, is to find out what happens if we don't have some outside species trying to influence us either way. Definitely not exploiting us, but we don't even really need the good stuff. We just need to be left alone with our connection to nature, our connection to our own souls and our higher selves, and figure this shit out as a species. That's what needs to happen. And that's probably what will happen. At least things are set up for that to happen. And I think that that's a pretty fucking beautiful thing, paid for at a very high cost, because, let's face it, there's a lot of souls that are going to get the fuck out of Dodge once, they can, and have been getting the fuck out of Dodge as they can. What I mean by that is just getting away from this planet, getting out of the machine. But obviously there's going to be a lot that kind of want to see what happens too, so it should get interesting, right? And I think that those who put in the service, if you will, of going through the 6 loops with the belief in humanity will be rewarded when they see what happens on the other side. And this is kind of the curtain being pulled back, if you will, on the idea that we don't have free will here, and that we are stuck here, and that we are trapped here. We're finally not. And that's a good thing. So, I guess it's about time. I'm probably gonna end with this. Why I know all of this shit, and that is because I was able to see outside of it. Had been unplugged. There was a group of people who were unplugged, and as part of that, I decided to come back for my own personal reasons. That's not to say I was unplugged to do anything special. I can't say that that's why. I can just say that I've been outside of it, I've seen it, I've heard it from that angle, and I've come back in here knowing that. So I didn't come back in here to tell you this. In fact, I've done everything but kick and scream not to do it. I just wanted to do it for my own reasons. So that's where the information has come from. With that said, I would say that if you have the means to archive these videos, you might want to. I don't know that they will stay up. There's people from I've known prior to all of you finding out about me that have been waiting for me to finish this. Is part of why I've been doing it kind of slowly, to make sure that everything had enough time to be digested before I actually spit it all out. And now that I kind of have, I can't speak for what will happen in terms of these videos. So what if you, they might not, I don't even want to say it. We can all see what's going on the internet right now, YouTube and all that stuff. So, but some people wanted to hear me say this, so I've been granted a lot of grace. Still trying to watch what I say. And I think that's kind of it. I'm glad it's over. Alice, I hope you're right. I'll probably have to talk about this more. We'll do a whole video where you guys can ask me questions. I think what the best way to do is get you guys to send me some questions. Probably the Facebook page would be the best way to do that. Somewhere where I can gather them all in one place. And I'll go through that list, and then I'll look at the chat and ask me questions that way. And hopefully that will help. And from there, if anyone else watching this eventually wants to, talk to me about it within context of their own experience with it, then just reach out. It's winter time in Canada, so I won't be out wandering as much, and therefore probably be around a little bit more. But anyways,